20 years after graduation, Sarah thought she had buried her college dreams along with her youthful idealism. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Her former roommate, Emma, had died in a car accident, leaving behind an unfinished novel and a letter that would resurrect a promise they'd made in their dorm room decades ago. What began as a pact between two ambitious literature majors to write the great American novel had been forgotten in the rush of careers, marriages, and mortgages. But grief has a way of excavating buried treasures, and Emma's death would force Sarah to confront not just her loss, but the dreams she'd abandoned and the person she'd once promised to become. The autumn of 1993 painted our small liberal arts college in brilliant oranges and deep crimsons. But inside Whitman Hall's cramped dormitory room, Emma and I were painting our futures with words. We were 19, invincible, and absolutely certain that our English literature degrees would catapult us directly into literary stardom. While our classmates worried about upcoming midterms, we stayed up until 3 a.m. crafting elaborate plans for the novels we would write, the awards we would win, and the profound impact our words would have on the world. "Promise me," Emma said one particularly inspired night. Her fingers stained with ink from the fountain pen she insisted made her feel more authentic as a writer. "Promise me that no matter what happens after graduation, no matter how life tries to pull us in different directions, we'll never give up on our writing. We'll finish our novels, even if it takes us 50 years. The promise felt as natural as breathing. We were young women who believed in the power of literature to change hearts and minds. We had devoured Virginia Woolf and Toni Morrison, discussed Sylvia Plath's raw honesty over countless cups of terrible dining hall coffee, and written terrible, but passionate poetry that we read aloud to each other with complete seriousness. Our professors praised our insights, our essays earned A's, and our futures seemed limitless. We sealed our pact with a handshake and a shared bottle of cheap wine smuggled into our dry campus. Emma pulled out a notebook, one of those black and white composition books, and we each wrote our novel ideas inside, signing our names with flourishes that seemed to mark us as serious artists. She kept the notebook, promising to guard our dreams like a sacred text. That winter, we started our novels. Emma wrote about a woman returning to her grandmother's house in rural Alabama, uncovering family secrets buried in letters hidden in the attic. I began a story about sisters separated by adoption, finding each other through a series of coincidences that felt magical but grounded in emotional truth. We shared chapters, offered critiques, and believed with the fervor of true believers that we were destined for greatness. But graduation came faster than we expected, and with it, the scattering that happens to even the closest college friends. Emma took a job at a small-town newspaper in Vermont. I moved to Boston for a corporate communications position that paid well, but felt nothing like the writing life we'd envisioned. We promised to stay in touch, to keep writing, to support each other's literary ambitions. For a while, we did. The transition from college idealist to working adult happened gradually, like a photograph slowly fading in sunlight. In those first few years after graduation, Emma and I maintained our correspondence with religious devotion. We sent each other drafts, celebrated small victories like getting a short story published in a local magazine, and commiserated over rejection letters that seemed to arrive with brutal regularity. Emma's letters from Vermont painted pictures of a quaint life that seemed perfectly suited for a budding novelist. She wrote about covering town council meetings and high school football games for the local paper, but also described long walks through maple forests and evenings spent writing at a desk positioned by her apartment window overlooking Main Street. Her novel progressed steadily. She sent me chapters about Magnolia, her protagonist, discovering that her grandmother had hidden a decades-long love affair that challenged everything the family believed about their matriarch's proper Southern life. Meanwhile, I struggled to find time for fiction between my demanding corporate schedule and the social expectations of Boston's young professional scene. My novel about the separated sisters felt increasingly foreign to my daily reality of client presentations and networking events. The chapters I managed to produce felt stilted, disconnected from the passionate voice I'd discovered in college. By our mid-20s, our correspondence began to shift. Emma met David, a kind high school teacher who shared her love of literature, but didn't write himself. I started dating Marcus, an ambitious lawyer who viewed my writing as a charming hobby rather than a serious pursuit. Our letters became less frequent, filled more with updates about relationships and career developments than discussions of plot, structure, and character development. The corporate world rewarded my skills in ways that writing never had. Promotions came regularly, along with salary increases that allowed me to rent a nice apartment and take vacations Emma couldn't afford on her journalist salary. I told myself I was being practical, building a foundation that would eventually allow me to write full-time. But months turned into years, and the foundation kept expanding while the writing time never materialized. Emma's letters grew shorter and less frequent. She mentioned feeling stuck, both in her novel and in her small town. David proposed, and while she wrote about feeling happy, I detected undertones of uncertainty. Was this the life she'd imagined for herself? Were we both settling for safer versions of the dreams we'd once held so fiercely? The last real conversation we had about our writing happened during a brief reunion in New York City when we were both 28. Over expensive cocktails that I paid for, Emma confessed that she hadn't touched her novel in months. I admitted that I'd stopped carrying notebooks everywhere, stopped seeing story potential, and overheard conversations. We promised each other it was temporary, just a pause while we figured out our lives. Neither of us realized we were already mourning the writers we'd planned to become. The next decade passed like pages flipping in a book I wasn't really reading. Emma married David in a small ceremony I couldn't attend due to a work conference I now can't even remember. I sent an expensive gift and a heartfelt card, promising to visit soon, a promise that joined the growing pile of good intentions I never acted upon. My own life followed the trajectory that successful people are supposed to want. Marcus and I married in a lavish Boston wedding where Emma sent regrets and a beautiful handmade quilt her grandmother had crafted decades earlier. I was promoted to senior vice president, bought a house in an upscale suburb, and filled my days with the kind of busy productivity that feels important until you stop long enough to question what it's producing. Emma's Christmas cards arrived, faithfully each year, always with a handwritten note that grew progressively shorter. She and David were trying to have children. The newspaper was struggling financially. She'd taken a part-time job at the local library to supplement their income. Through social media, that new way of maintaining the illusion of connection without actual intimacy, I watched her life in curated snapshots, hiking photos, book club meetings, fundraisers for the struggling paper. I told myself we'd grown apart naturally, the way college friends do. We'd chosen different paths, and that was normal, even healthy. Emma had stayed true to small-town values while I'd embraced urban ambition. We were both living authentic lives, just not the ones we'd imagined at 19. But late at night, when Marcus was asleep beside me and the house was quiet except for the hum of expensive appliances, I sometimes thought about that notebook Emma had kept. What had happened to our novel ideas? Had she thrown the notebook away during one of her moves? Did she ever reread those passionate declarations we'd written in purple ink, believing we were destining ourselves for literary immortality? The corporate world had taught me to measure success in quarterly reports and annual reviews, but it hadn't prepared me for the strange grief that accompanied professional achievement. Each promotion felt hollow, each salary increase meaningless. I had everything I'd been taught to want, but I found myself envying Emma's authentic connection to her community, her work that mattered to real people in tangible ways. When I turned 35, I went through what Marcus dismissively called my midlife crisis phase. I enrolled in evening creative writing workshops, determined to resurrect the writer I'd abandoned. But sitting in circles with other aspiring writers, workshopping stories that felt forced and artificial, I realized how far I'd traveled from the passionate young woman who'd once stayed up all night crafting sentences that felt like prayers. The workshop leader, a published novelist whose books sold modestly but earned critical respect, asked us to write about a moment when we'd lost something important. I found myself writing about Emma, about promises made in dorm rooms, about the slow dissolution of dreams. When I read it aloud, the room felt unusually quiet. "There's real emotion there," the instructor said, "but it feels like you're writing about someone else's life. What would happen if you wrote about your own?" I never went back to the workshop. The question felt too dangerous to explore. The phone rang at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October, 20 years almost to the day after Emma and I had made our promise. Marcus had already left for his morning run, and I was drinking coffee while scrolling through emails that seemed urgently important until that moment. The area code was Vermont's, but I didn't recognize the number. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" The woman's voice carried the careful neutrality that professional bearers of bad news cultivate. "This is Jennifer Walsh from the Bennington Banner. I'm calling about Emma Richardson, Emma Taylor, I mean. She listed you as an emergency contact." The coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering on the kitchen's expensive tile floor. Coffee spread in dark tributaries around my bare feet, but I couldn't move to clean it up. The woman was still talking, using words like accident and "I'm sorry." An immediate family has been notified, but my mind had stopped processing language normally. Emma was dead. A rainy night, a curve she'd driven safely thousands of times. Another driver who'd been texting instead of watching the road. She was 41 years old. She died instantly, which the woman seemed to think was a comfort. I'd been an emergency contact. After 2 decades of Christmas cards and sporadic social media likes, after years of promising to visit and never following through, I was still someone Emma trusted to handle crisis. The responsibility felt crushing and precious simultaneously. "David was destroyed," the woman explained. Emma's parents were flying in from Alabama. The funeral would be Saturday. There would be calling hours Friday evening. And then, almost as an afterthought, Mrs. Taylor left specific instructions about some personal items she wanted you to have. A notebook, some manuscripts. "I have them here at the office whenever you're able to collect them." I drove to Vermont. That afternoon, calling in sick for the first time in 3 years, Marcus was sympathetic but confused by my reaction. "You hadn't talked to her in months?" he pointed out, not unkindly. "Why are you taking this so hard?" I couldn't explain that grief isn't always proportional to recent contact, that losing Emma felt like losing the last witness to who I'd once planned to become. The Banner's office was a cramped storefront on Main Street, the kind of authentic, small-town newspaper that big corporations were systematically destroying. Jennifer Walsh was younger than I'd expected, probably fresh out of journalism school, carrying the idealism Emma and I had once shared. "She talked about you sometimes?" Jennifer said, handing me a cardboard box that felt impossibly light for containing 20 years of deferred dreams. "About how you two were going to be famous writers someday. She kept working on her novel, right up until the end." The box contained that black and white composition notebook, its pages yellowed and softened by decades of handling. Our original novel ideas were there, written in the confident handwriting of teenagers who believed the world was waiting for their words. But there were other things, too. Printed pages of Emma's completed novel, all 400 pages of it. A letter with my name written Emma's careful cursive. A flash drive labeled "For Sarah, keep the promise." I sat in my rental car outside the newspaper office and read Emma's letter with trembling hands. She'd been diagnosed with breast cancer 6 months earlier. The prognosis was good, the doctors optimistic, but facing her mortality had clarified priorities she'd been ignoring for years. She'd finished her novel during treatment, writing between chemotherapy sessions with the urgency of someone who'd finally remembered what mattered most. "I never stopped being a writer," she wrote. "I just stopped believing I deserved to call myself one." Emma's funeral was a celebration of a life lived authentically, surrounded by a community that had genuinely loved her. Standing beside her casket, I made her a new promise. I would finish my novel, the one about sisters separated by adoption. More importantly, I would live like the writer I'd once believed I could become. 6 months later, I resigned from my corporate position. Marcus and I divorced amicably. He needed someone who shared his ambitions, and I needed space to rediscover mine. I sold the suburban house and moved to a small apartment filled with natural light and the sound of neighbors actually living their lives. Emma's novel was published posthumously by a small press that specialized in authentic regional fiction. It won the New England Book Award and earned reviews that praised its honest portrayal of family secrets and small-town complexity. I wrote the afterword, finally telling the story of 2 college friends who promised to become writers. My own novel is nearly finished. It's taken me 3 years to find my voice again, to trust that stories matter, that dreams deferred aren't necessarily dreams denied. Emma's death taught me that grief can be a teacher, that loss can illuminate what we've been too afraid or too busy to see. The person you were at 19 still lives inside you, waiting for permission to dream again. What promises have you made to yourself that still deserve honoring? Start today. Start now. Your authentic life is still possible.